Hi there and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. Every plant has a purpose to benefit us and our ecology, but since their effect on us may be somewhat mysterious, today author Susan Wittig Albert explores a few psychoactive plants that wake us up, calm us down, or alter our mood. On tour, let's visit a gardener who finds spiritual renewal through his pond and plants.
For Dr. Mark Aiken, his pond and garden are more than a way to work up a sweat on the weekends. It's a place of solace after on-call hours, and where he and his wife Debbie navigate with their family and friends. The gardens hosted weddings and receptions and momentous family events, like when Debbie and Mark returned from his kidney transplant operation, with her as donor. They were up for another challenge when they bought the property in the first place.
When we bought this lot, several other people had tried to buy it before us and were discouraged because it had water on the lot. There was a natural spring that kept the whole back part of the lot wet. And not being a water gardener prior to building the house, I had no experience with ponds at all. And as we tried to figure out how to harness the spring water, a decision was made, well, gee, if we've got water, why not use it somewhere? And one thought led to another, and I had a landscape architect, Kurt Arnett, that helped me immensely with the design.
Mark has learned a lot since his mistakes as a novice ponder in 1996. Thanks to Anita Nelson from Nelson's Water Gardens and the Austin Pond Society, he was soon on the right water track.
I really had no experience when I got into this, and without the Pond Society, I could not have accomplished most of what I've done with the pond. There was a funny thing. At one meeting, they asked how many people there had their own pond, and about 80% of the people raised their hand. And the next question was, how many of you plan to build another pond? And about 80% of the people raised their hand. And ponds are really fulfilling. I'm a do-it-yourselfer. I have my master's degree in engineering. I'm bent a little bit different direction than some people. And essentially, I've planted the vast majority of the plants here myself. I've totally maintained the pond since day one myself. But ponds are easy. You put your plant in a basket, in a pot, and so you have to plant it in the spring, and then about once every 3 or 4 weeks you put a little fertilizer pill in, but you don't have to weed your pond, you don't have to mow it, you don't have to do much to it.
The journey to the pond begins at the patio. Mark and Debbie had a plan when they designed the family pool.
The concept here was to make it look as if the swimming pool was connected with the spring. And the negative edge on the pool, that was the view that we wanted pretty much from this perspective, that it was just cascading over and going to onto the springs.
Mark also wanted plants to be his visual and physical guides to view the pond and garden from all perspectives. But his journey into gardening didn't stop after the first plantings.
I've planted and replanted and gotten rid of the things I didn't like and put different things in.
And since Mark's first gardens, the trees have grown, contributing their perspective to his plans.
A lot of the plants that we had previously want more sun than what they're getting now, and so I progressively had to go to more shade-type plants. And we've done a lot of work on the trees. Part of the reason we bought this lot is because it had big trees already, and it's kind of hard to plant a tree and get them to be this size. But we've had a lot of work raising the lower branches so that you can see under the trees and I can get more light into my plants. but I'm constantly changing. The plants, many of the perennials that we planted in 1996 got old and leggy, and even though you trim them back, they just didn't look that good. And so about 3 years ago, I had a mass exodus of perennial plants and brought in a bunch of new ones. I had Cheryl McLaughlin and Kevin Wood come and help me with getting a new look. My wife wanted color more, and so I've kept most of my perennials, but I've put sprinkles of annuals throughout the pond area and the garden. When I first built this property, along with Kurt Arnett, my plan was to have the entire garden Texas native plants, and I have over 200 species of native Texas plants here. The problem is you have those times where there's not really something actively blooming, and it's beautiful. It's green and different shapes and sizes. I found that sprinkling color that's year-round in certain locations really adds to the beauty.
The garden's journey is like the one Mark and Debbie took in the beginning when they met. Never static, but always open to another reflective chapter.
The pond was what I started with, and then over the years added on sections, and they all have their different character, and if they were all built at the same time, they may have looked more alike, but as I aged, as the garden aged, I had different thoughts about planning and development. You're not really a gardener if you don't have a new area to work on. I am a weekend gardener. I don't consider myself a plant expert at all. But I love plants, and they're fun to work with. And sometimes people ask me the name of a plant, and I'll tell them, you know, I don't recall the name, I just know what it looks like, and I love it. And the names are almost unimportant to me. It's just enjoying the plant for what it is. I have a very busy life as an obstetrician, and during the week rarely get a chance to see my garden, but weekends this is a place I find some solitude and some beauty. There's nothing quite like being in my pond and having the perfume of all the lilies, and you almost feel like you're in heaven out there. It's such a nice experience. But I am pretty much a weekend gardener, and the scope of my project is probably bigger than a lot of other people, but I'm kind of the belief if you don't do the gardening yourself, you don't respect it and don't enjoy it nearly as much as if someone else is tending to it. And so it's a part of you when you're in the garden. It's an expression of who you are and what you like. And so that's part of the joy of gardening, is the experience that one gets from it.
What a beautiful pond. Thanks so much for sharing your garden with us. And now we're joined by one of our favorite guests here on Central Texas Gardener, Susan Wittig Albert. Always a pleasure to have you join us here.
Thank you, Tom. So good to see you.
You are such a busy and prolific writer, and our topic today is one that blends beautifully with the narrative of your most recent book, which is Mourning Gloria. And for those who don't know your work, why don't you describe real briefly your heroine and the kind of the series of books you've written with these botanical themes?
Well, this is number 19
Wow.
in a series of books about an herbalist, China Bayles, who lives here in Central Texas in a little town called Pecan Springs, halfway between Austin and San Antonio. And all of her mysteries involve plants in one way or another, all the way from Time of Death, which was the first book, that's T-H-Y-M-E, of course,
right.
to Mourning Gloria. And in this book, China gets involved with the dark side of herbs, psychoactive herbs, and actually the street trade. You know, we like to think about herbs as those warm and fuzzy things that we can use, yes, to our culinary plants and plants that make us feel good. Well, plants make us feel all kinds of ways, and that's one of the themes of this book.
Okay, so more China Bayles gets involved in the drug trafficking situation.
Somebody actually tells her how to turn Mourning Gloria seeds into good stuff.
Well,
right.
Somebody's definition of good stuff. But let's there are so many different plants that we use in our gardens and actually consume daily.
Actually consume daily, yes.
Right. I'm sipping coffee here between our words. So obviously that's one plant that we could talk about.
Well, coffee is ubiquitous in our culture. Most of us couldn't get through the day with 120,000 tons of caffeine a year. We drink in coffee. There's a wonderful legend about it. It's said that a Yemeni shepherd saw his goats jumping up and down and being very frisky after they ate the berries off a plant. He took it to a local monk who brewed it up, drank it, and it kept him awake all night while he was trying to meditate. And so the next thing you know, it was Starbucks.
2,000 years later,
right,
here we are.
Exactly, here we are.
All prancing goats.
Yes, that's right. And on the other side, there's tea. If we don't like caffeine in our coffee, there is tea, which we don't grow here in the United States. We do grow a caffeine-related plant, though, and that's Yaupon holly. I'm sure
this is one I want to spend a little time talking about because of, again, for the stimulant plants, where everybody thinks about coffee. But we were visiting just a short while ago, and you were telling me that during World War II, when coffee was rationed, the government got into the Yaupon business.
Yes, they tried in South Carolina. Actually, it began in the Depression because it was so well known that Yaupon was a strong source of caffeine. In fact, the early anthropologists who had observed Indian tribes drinking this stuff, and the name for Yaupon holly is Ilex vomitoria, which was yes, that's right. It was an observational term because the men, only the men would do this, they would drink huge quantities of this caffeine-heavy brew and then vomit it back. It was used as a purgative, but it was also used as a way to energize themselves, So the government said, during the Depression, let's try growing this, and then during the Second World War, we've got a good thing going, but then the war was over. And the idea of vomitoria still clung in many people's minds. So.
Right. Yeah, it's a fairly strong descriptor.
Right, but it doesn't taste bad. It does not make you vomit. It does not induce vomiting, and it's really easy to make. You just go out.
And you've made the Yaupon tea yourself.
Yes, I have. And many people have drunk yerba buena, which is the South American version of it.
Okay.
It's a related plant. And it's big in South America.
Okay, yerba buena, you see it sold all the time in local stores. So
So, but all you have to do is take these fresh leaves and parch them. I use a cast iron skillet and dry them, and then you can brew it up as a caffeine drink.
Well, there you go. And so you put a little lemon and honey in your Yaupon tea?
No, I just dash mine up the way I always do. But when the end of the world as we know it arrives, we don't have to go without our caffeine because we have the secret.
Okay, very good. Well, a couple of other things that are stimulants. I think of chilies as being stimulants to my palate, not to my nervous system, but they actually act that way.
Yes, they do. They create an endorphin response that's a great pleasure. And in some ways that acts like tobacco, which is both a stimulant and a sedative. So peppers will stimulate us, energize us, yes. It's that pleasure-pain principle.
Right. Well, as somebody who eats Thai food frequently, there are a few times where I've walked out of the restaurant feeling a little lightheaded. Maybe this is the result.
Yes. And there is another feeling, it's called chili hand. If you peel your chili peppers indiscriminately, you can actually, your hands can actually feel that for hours and hours and hours, that tingling, that pain.
Right.
And there is a strong release of endorphins with that too.
And of course, cocoa is renowned throughout the world as a stimulant.
Yes, and in fact as an aphrodisiac. as well. And in fact, when coffee came to Europe, it was at first said, be careful about that stuff. Don't drink that. That's an aphrodisiac. Well, of course, that led to more coffee drinking.
Of course.
But cocoa, the same way.
Right.
The chocolate beans were brewed up and were actually sold as an aphrodisiac. It has theobromine in it as well as caffeine, and it is a pretty strong pepper upper. The Aztecs brewed it up with chili peppers.
Yeah. And it was a drink that was ritualistically drunk.
A drink of the gods.
Yes, well, chocolate, yeah, I could understand that.
I like to tell people chocolate is an herb too.
Right, well, there you go.
Just watch it. Be careful because some of it's pretty calorie dense. We won't talk about that.
No, we won't. Now, on the other side of the equation, we've talked about stimulants. There are a whole array of plants that have what you say is a soporific effect, and that really means to just slows us down.
Slows us down, and then there are plants that literally put us to sleep. The plants that can slow us down are lavender, which is wonderful. A little bit of lavender scented oil on your pillow, on a Kleenex in the pillowcase, or just on the light bulb in the room. Literally slows down brain waves, and scientists have demonstrated that over and over. Another plant that grows in your garden, I'll bet, is dill. That's another slowing down plant. The word dill comes from the Norwegian word for lull, meaning to put to sleep. Isn't that lovely?
And
nice.
And getting back to the lavender thing, I've actually heard that in some countries in the world that they will pump lavender scent into prisons.
Oh, really? I
Yes.
hadn't heard that one. That's interesting. Well, there was an experiment with rosemary, which is a picker-upper in our last category we were talking about. They used it at the University of Chicago in an experiment for kids who are undergoing testing, that is, taking tests.
Right.
And the kids who got the rosemary got picked up, got more alert, were more awake, did better on the tests.
Well, I mean, they're it's
we
all
just
sorts
don't.
of fun
We
stuff
just
here.
are not aware as humans. We treat these things as products, not as processes in ourselves. That's one of the things I always want to do with the China Bayles books, is to bring us back to the plant base that we live in. It's really important. Important for me, anyway.
Right. Sometimes these act on us. Sometimes they act on the creatures we share our lives with, which leads us to catnip.
Ah,
and
yes.
I think about this because catnip is part of my arsenal for controlling my herd. I use it.
Cats,
I use it as a right. I use it as a bribe, and also as a way to wear them out when they're wearing me out.
Catnip is a really interesting plant because it has a soporific effect on us. Before tea came to England as the national drink from the Orient, everybody grew catnip in their gardens, and that was the tea of choice. And it was it was not an energizing tea. They were used to drinking it before they went to bed. It was often given to children to quiet their colic. But on felines, at least on those felines that have this genetic proclivity, your cats must all share the same gene.
Apparently they do.
Cats who have that gene really go crazy over catnip.
Yeah, well,
It's a euphoric for them.
And if they've driven me crazy and they're keeping me up at night, I'd give them a little bit of that before I go to bed. They wear themselves out, and all is well with the world.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? The major narcotic plant, the plant that does put people literally to sleep, we're not permitted to grow. The government told us in 1942 that we can't grow opium poppies in this country. The Opium Poppy Control Act, 1942. And that plant has been of just enormous benefit to humans. Back as far as Egyptian times, doctors were putting people to sleep so they could set breaks, could perform surgery. Of course, now we have learned how to abuse that plant, and that's a very sad thing.
Right. Very dangerous thing for many
very
people.
Very dangerous thing.
Right.
By the way, you can have poppy seeds. You just can't plant them. I mean, how could we have poppy seed rolls if we didn't have poppy seeds?
Well, they're fine on the muffins or the rolls
That's right.
or on your bagels.
That's as far as we'll go with that one.
Okay, very good. Now, there, in addition to, it was stimulants and we had soporifics, but there are also hallucinogenic or euphoriant plants. And there are a lot of those that we're used to dealing with as well that we don't think of in that way sometimes. The Mourning Glory, which is related to the title of your book, Mourning Gloria, is one. And it's not all the different species of Mourning Gloria that have this quality.
No, it's a particular species that we know as the Christmas vine. It has a white blossom. They made it blue on the color of the book, but that's just fine. It connects it with a plant that grows in our garden. But this particular Christmas tree vine was used by the Maztecs, by the shamans. And their word for the seeds, that was the part of the plant that they used, was ololiaqui, little round things, little round things. And they used that in their divining, in their ritual processes. It was really very important to them.
Well, and people who've grown up in the past few decades have heard many stories about the use of hallucinogenic plants in the Native Americans of the Southwest, like the peyote and things like that are fairly commonly known. But I think it probably surprised a lot of people that there are things that might be growing in the garden that have that same quality. There's one, a member of the salvia family that fits into this, which surprised me when I first heard this.
Yes, and that's gotten quite a lot of attention in the media, although the media doesn't sometimes get things right. But Salvia Salvia divinorum is a plant that has been used again in Mexico and points south as a divining plant that helps shamans look into the future. There were for a while, and the Texas legislature considered outlawing it, but it would be pretty hard to outlaw that plant. It looks like all the other salvias.
Well, we only have a few seconds left, Susan, so real briefly, tell us what your next big writing project is.
Oh, I'm working on a series called The Darling Dahlias. This is a garden club, and the books are set in southern Alabama. That's Darling, Alabama, in the 1930s. So it's a book about the Depression.
Okay, well, I know that people will love that as they've loved your whole China Bayles series. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for coming on, sharing your expertise, your love of the garden, and your quick wit with us. We really enjoy when you come.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And coming up next, it's our friend Daphne.
Hello and welcome to Down to Earth. I'm Daphne Richards. Our question today is about mosquito dunks and whether or not they're safe to use in your rainwater harvesting barrels. And then if you want to use that water on your vegetable beds. These products are actually very safe. So they are safe to use in your rainwater harvesting barrels, even if you're going to use that water on vegetables. They are microbial larvicides, and the active ingredient is a bacillus bacterium, usually Bacillus thuringiensis, more commonly referred to as just BT. And if that sounds familiar, it's probably because you've used that BT product to kill tomato worms in a different form, of course, or some other chomping caterpillar, which these are also active on. The BT bacterium is lethal to the larvae of certain insects, but it has no toxic effect on humans or animals. So yes, it's very, very safe. These products are only active for about 30 days though, so put yourself on a schedule and make sure to follow it or you will have mosquitoes. But you could also use a very fine mesh screen, such as those for windows. As long as you can keep the mosquitoes away from being able to land on the water and lay their eggs, you'll be fine. Our plant this week is shrimp plant, Justicia brandigiana. This is a very popular perennial in our area because it is very beautiful. It not only has beautiful flowers, but also very attractive foliage and a wispy growth habit. It gets about 3 feet tall and wide, but it can spread very easily into a much larger colony if you give it the space. The stems are weak, and thus they lay over a bit in a weeping habit that sways nicely in the breeze. It's been windy this year, so that's a very pretty plant. The flower spikes are borne at the tips of the stems, and they droop in a slightly curved arch. The actual flowers are small and emerge from colored bracts that range in color from a rusty pink to a dark red. As you might guess, these flowers do resemble shrimp, which give it its common name. Some great selections have been made in breeding this plant, leading to cultivars with floral blacks ranging from yellow to a bright red to even a lime green, which can be very interesting. You can also find cultivars with various foliage colors, from a deep green to a striking purple. Shrimp plant is listed as hardy to zone 8, and it will remain evergreen in mild winters. If we have a colder winter, it might freeze to the ground, but it will re-emerge in the spring. It does great in both full sun and part sun areas. Prefers well-drained soil, so be careful about overwatering if you have clay. It does need regular irrigation to maintain it, but planting it in light shade will also help it use less water. To do in your garden this week, it's time to plant seedlings of tomatoes and peppers. Yes, again for those summer plants, if you want to have a second harvest season this fall. We'd love to hear from you. Please visit klru.org/CTG to send us your question or a plant of the week from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Visit klru.org/CTG to learn more, watch online, and follow the blog. Next week, get a few tips to help our wildlife through summer. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online, and follow CTG's blog, check out klru.org/CTG.